Hi, my name is Michelle, and I wanted to talk about my son that has been going to Gabaldon Chiropractic. When I was pregnant, Dr. Gabaldon had helped me try to get the baby in position, and during my labor I actually had a stalled labor. My water broke, but I wasn't contracting. And so it took about 8 hours and there was no contractions happening, and they were ready to put me on Pitocin and try to induce the baby. And so I went ahead and called Cynthia Gabaldon, and she adjusted me, and I immediately went into labor and had the baby within a couple hours. So that was amazing to be able to have a natural birth and not have to undergo any interference with that. And so as my son began to develop, I had heard that boys were slower than girls, and they might be a little delayed developmentally, and so I figured, he may be a month behind or two, or he could be ahead. And I knew the first milestone was rolling over, and that was usually around 4 months. But my son didn't roll over, and 5 months came around, and 6 months came around, and he still didn't roll over. And so I thought that was odd, but I didn't want to panic. And around 7 months, he started to sit up, but I noticed he couldn't sit up by himself. I always had to basically put him on the floor to sit, but he couldn't get into that position himself. Came to 7 and 8 months, and he still wasn't rolling over, so maybe I thought maybe he just isn't going to roll over. But then I started noticing he still couldn't sit by himself, and with crawling he could crawl, but it was a very awkward, unnatural crawl. I know a lot of people refer to army crawling, but it was even more unnatural than that. And so I began to notice that he was having these physical issues where he could be placed into positions, but he couldn't transition from positions. And so 9 months came around, and he still wasn't rolling over, he still wasn't able to crawl properly, and he wasn't able to move from sitting to crawling, or basically move into any position. And he clearly had the desire to do it. He would, it looked like an invisible line. He would try to move forward, but then he would cry and just sit there and not move. And he wanted to do it, but he couldn't. And so I started to get on the phone and call doctors, which I didn't even know who to call. I called occupational therapists and developmental delay doctors and started scheduling all these appointments, and people were telling me that these were red flags and maybe we need to do MRIs, and I just became really overwhelmed with what everyone was wanting to do. And so I was thinking, this seems like a physical issue. It doesn't seem like something else that some of these doctors were implying. And so I contacted Cynthia Gabaldon, and I had my son look at her, and she basically said that he couldn't feel his body with his neck being out, and that she wanted to adjust him and give it a chance. And so we went ahead and tried that. He had about 3 or 4 adjustments, and after a week he immediately started rolling over. And after a couple more adjustments, we decided to keep going. He began moving from a sit position to a crawl position. And so we kept going from there, and then he started to crawl pretty normally. He was doing the crisscross pattern with his arms, he had his legs going, and he just has the most beautiful crawl. And so all of this happened within 3 weeks at 9 months old. So I was floored for him to just even be able to accomplish all those milestones. And so we continued on, and around 12 months he started to explore with standing and walking, and we were really excited, but he stalled again, and he wasn't quite able to move, and it was like that invisible line had come back. And so I took him back to see Cynthia Gabaldon, and she began adjusting him, and within 2 weeks he started walking. And so now he is 14 months old and he's walking, and I'm just ecstatic, because if you would have told me that he would be walking at 14 months when he couldn't even roll over at 9 months, that's just a miracle to me, that he was able to do all this naturally without going through, all of these different doctors and tests, and a lot of frustration that probably wouldn't even helped him in the end, because in the end it was a physical alignment issue. So I'm very thankful to have found Dr. Gabaldon's office and to be able to address this. And I think sometimes there are specialists and there are resources, and sometimes kids just need a little extra aid or a little help, and this was one of those situations where she was able to help him meet the milestones that he's reaching, and now he's just doing everything up to speed like every other child.
He's running around like Speedy Gonzalez is what he's doing.
He is.
That's awesome. Thank you so much.